Hi, my name is Aaron Marvel, and welcome to episode 5 in our series over assessment for learning. In this episode, we will be talking about how to maximize the effectiveness of your learning targets. So, we have 4 objectives in this lesson. First, I will describe some of the benefits of having clear and explicit learning targets. Then, we will discuss how to write various kinds of learning targets. I will give a brief explanation over the 5 different learning targets according to Stiggins, Arter, Chapois, and Chapois. And lastly, we will look at several practical ways we can integrate learning targets in your lessons to help students take ownership of their learning. So let's begin. Let's begin thinking about why learning targets are a good idea to integrate in your lessons. First of all, notice that I don't say how to communicate learning targets to students. Communicating the learning target is only the first step. Students need the opportunity to process and understand learning targets. When students reach a level of understanding of learning targets, they then can begin to serve as a guide to making decisions about learning strategies. When a child goes home and the parent asks that question that every student eventually hears, "What did you learn today?" they should easily be able to answer that question. Not with vague answers like math. They ideally should be specific. I was able to add like fractions without any help, but I'm struggling with the steps in simplifying the fractions first. Students who can speak with specificity and clarity to this level have an ability to think metacognitively. So, what is metacognition? Simply put, it's thinking about thinking. And students who are more efficient in thinking metacognitively are typically better learners and therefore higher academic achievers. Consider your students' abilities to think about their learning capabilities, their ability to monitor their own learning, their use of effective learning strategies, and their ability to plan their approaches to learning. Establishing learning targets and building student understanding of the learning targets will help support each of these areas of metacognition. In other words, they will become more efficient in making logical and informed decisions concerning their learning strategies. Integrating learning targets can also help students develop more advanced epistemic beliefs. So, what are epistemic beliefs anyways? Epistemic beliefs include opinions about the nature of learning and knowledge. How many times have you witnessed or been in a conversation with a student that thought they knew everything there was about a topic, but clearly through the conversation you realize they are missing a lot of information? This is not due to arrogance, but simply a natural progression that children take to understand what knowledge is. Students sometimes have a misguided sense of knowledge and what mastery looks like. Because students may have an overly simplistic view of knowledge, they may believe they have mastered a skill when they truly haven't. Exploring the learning targets and giving examples of mastery helps students know if they have truly reached mastery and how to get there. To help develop more sophisticated epistemic beliefs, teachers can encourage students to think about the learning strategies they use. However, to do this, students must first understand the learning target at hand, as certain learning strategies are more appropriate for certain kinds of learning targets. In this slide are several questions that are important to consider to determine some of your own epistemic beliefs. Feel free to pause the video if you are interested in reading through these. So, when students know the learning targets, assessments begin to take on meaning. Assessments now can communicate to students not how smart or dumb they are, but exactly where they have succeeded and where they have missed the mark on particular learning targets if appropriate feedback is provided. We'll talk further about feedback in episode 7, but consider 2 students. One receives a 65%, while the other is told through feedback specifically where they missed the mark in relation to the learning targets and how to proceed. What do you think the effects are on each of these students? The second student will likely continue in the learning process, while the first will likely decide her efforts were useless and quit. In fact, research shows that as soon as students receive a grade, regardless of how high or low the grade is, learning stops. Paul Dressel put grading this way: a grade can be regarded only as an inaccurate judgment by a biased and variable judge of the extent to which a student has attained an undefined level of mastery of an unknown proportion of an indefinite material. In other words, grades are often only minimally reflective of a student's actual ability, much less useful to the student, teacher, administrator, or parent. On the other hand, consider these two comments left by teachers on student work. The first addresses a student's ability to summarize the passage, and the second, a student's ability to order decimals from largest to smallest. The comments give the students direction as to how to become more proficient in both tasks. In effect, the comments direct student attention back to learning targets. They show students that each assessment question has a purpose. They show students that each assessment question is an opportunity to learn. And it gives students information about where they are in the learning process toward the learning targets. So, the next 3 slides discuss how to construct learning targets. As we discuss the construction of learning targets, notice 3 patterns that arise. In every scenario, ask if the learning targets are generic or specific, if the learning targets are usable, and if the learning targets are clear. So, many times learning targets come from standards established by local, state, or even the federal government. In this example, our learning target comes from a 4th grade English Language Arts Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. You can tell I'm from Texas. It is likely that students would not be able to use this learning target to monitor their own learning or to determine even what mastery looks like. That is why it is often important to break learning targets down into success criteria. In this example, the teacher breaks the learning target down into parts that are more specific and clear and therefore more usable on a student level. Now, students see that to categorize ideas into paragraphs, they must be able to choose 3 ideas that are related, to organize the paragraphs so they flow from one paragraph to the next, to maintain only one main idea within each paragraph, and ensure that all ideas work together to support one overall argument of the paper. These success criteria could be even further minimized into more focused criteria if necessary. To see how to implement learning targets and success criteria into your lessons, pause the video now and check out the example. The important thing to remember in this example is that the students do not have final say as to what the success criteria are. This is not a democratic process. It is the teacher's responsibility to lead students toward accurate observations and therefore appropriate success criteria. Learning targets must also reflect accurately the intended learning. In the example here, the learning target limits the learning intentions to the red badge of courage, when the teacher intended only to use the red badge of courage as the context of the true learning target. Sequence and summarize the plot's main events. The teacher could have easily chosen to use other contexts of learning as well, such as Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, The Sound of Music, or The Glass Menagerie. But again, these are not part of the intended learning on which the students should put their focus, and therefore should not be included in the learning target. When constructing rubrics, teachers must decide whether to use task-specific or generic rubrics. Task-specific rubrics are constructed in a way so they are useful for a single task, but will not likely be usable again for other dissimilar tasks. They do, however, provide students with extremely clear criteria for success and therefore are often used for summative assessments. An example might be, students are able to accurately measure 1 right, 2 acute, and 2 obtuse angles on playground equipment using a protractor. This success criteria clearly states what a student must do to be successful. A generic rubric, on the other hand, can be used on various tasks. The generic rubric is the preferred rubric for formative assessment, as it is general enough to be used from task to task. Nevertheless, the success criteria within the rubric must be specific enough for students to monitor their progress. In this sense, rubrics are a balancing act between generality and specificity. An example of a success criteria from a generic rubric might be, students are able to choose appropriate tools and use them to solve real-world problems in a variety of contexts. Again, these success criteria fall on a spectrum between general and specific, so they can easily be rewritten to have varying degrees of generality or specificity as needed. An advantage to generic rubrics is their ability to promote transfer, an extremely important ability for every learning target, since the generic rubric can be used from one task to the next. So learning targets can also be product-focused or process-focused. Think of product-focused criteria as being the ultimate destination of student learning, and process-focused criteria as the journey of the learning process. A product-focused success criteria might be to explain how people and events have influenced local community history. This is the ultimate success criteria, but the process-focused criteria tells us the smaller steps on our way to get to the product-focused criteria. Students would need to identify historical figures, identify their contributions, categorize their findings, and connect their findings with their own experiences from the community. These steps give students a clear map to follow in order to arrive at the overarching product-focused criteria. Be careful, however, not to constrain some of the advanced students that think outside of a clear path. They often may be able to arrive at a product-focused criteria by taking a different path. Finally, we have whether learning targets should be worded in official or student-friendly language. This will largely depend on the developmental level of your students and how important it is for your students to spend time with the language to arrive at a comfortable grasp of academic language. This learning target from an English language arts class is full of important vocabulary for students to eventually understand and use in their own discussions and writings, such as genre, evidence, synthesize, and support. These are words they will encounter again and again in their academic studies. An option may be to begin with student-friendly language like the one below and to eventually move into more complex language as the year progresses. Now, according to Stiggins, Chapois, and Chapois, there are 5 types of learning targets that we will quickly review. First, there are knowledge targets. Knowledge targets represent information that students need to understand or recall or list, etc., or something students should be able to do. An example would be identify the planets in Earth's solar system and their position in relation to the sun. Next, we have reasoning targets. Reasoning targets require students to use the information in some way or to apply it. Students have to use certain mental processes such as analyze, interpret, or compare. These are the higher level thinking skills. An example might be to summarize the elements of plot development. In this example, the student knows the different parts of the plot and how they develop, but now he must process that information to form a summary. Next, we have performance or skill targets, which require students to perform a task that must be observed to assess mastery. An example might be demonstrate safe practices during classroom and outdoor investigations. Notice that to demonstrate safe practices, the students must know what these practices are. Skills targets always require that students first master the knowledge targets that underlie the skills targets. We also have product targets, which require students to create some product, such as tables or graphs or a science project or PowerPoint slideshow. Many times, students create products in order to show mastery of a knowledge or reasoning target. In this case, the teacher would not necessarily establish a product target. The product is rather the vehicle the student uses to process new learning or to represent mastery. Product targets should only be established when the product is up for assessment. An example might be disassemble and assemble a carburetor and reinstall it to the pre-existing motor. The teacher will assess the finished product to ensure all parts are assembled correctly and that the motor runs again. Lastly, we have disposition targets. These are often overlooked as they are not in our mandated curriculum, but are important nonetheless to help students become more reflective learners. Disposition targets ask students to reflect on their attitudes about certain topics or tasks and set effective goals, such as to build the concept that we are all mathematicians with something to offer. If you're interested in reading further about these goals and assessment for learning, you can find Stiggins' Arter, Chapois, and Chapois book, which is referenced at the end of the lesson. You can also find a review over the book and a link to purchase it at mylyceum.com if you're interested. I'll also include the link here below. Finally, I want to provide you with practical tools that you can use immediately in your classrooms to begin integrating learning targets in your classroom. I won't read each of these to you, but I'll comment on each one before we wrap up the lesson. So, learning targets by nature are difficult to understand or to assess quality unless the reader of the learning target already has reached a level of mastery. Therefore, it's important to provide students with varying experiences to help develop a nose for quality. First, a teacher can help students understand some of the academic words within a learning target by defining them, providing synonyms, and lastly, providing examples and non-examples. Essentially, we want to provide opportunities for students to construct their own knowledge and definitions of quality work using examples and non-examples through the lens of the learning targets and success criteria. And that is what each of the following examples will do. They will provide examples of varying qualities and give students the opportunity to formulate their own opinions about mastery with the guidance from the teachers while using the learning targets and success criteria as a lens for assessment. In this example, students are led to compare their own work with work that is already at a mastery level, and then given the opportunity to discuss their findings. This is a great way to help students see where they currently are in their learning journey compared to where they need to be, which will help them eventually set goals for themselves. This example provides students lots of opportunities to see completed projects of varying qualities before ever starting their own project. The teacher also prepared students to begin using the vocabulary from the rubric by discussing vocabulary meaning before students discuss their observations. Notice that the teacher does not stop at small group discussion. He then has groups share out their findings so he can help shape their observations appropriately. Students should never have complete say in what mastery will look like. Their vision of mastery is normally incomplete and needs teacher guidance. These acronyms are great to use consistently with students with each new learning target. Using "what I'm looking for" will help students see that there is always something they must do or understand in order to master the learning target. Also, using "what I'm looking for" along with "we are learning today" gives students specifics as to how to reach mastery. This example shows a teacher can help students assess a performance or skill target. I like this strategy because it allows students to first formulate their opinions independently before consulting other students. They also are given the opportunity to compare their own findings with those of their peers and evaluate which of the shared criteria is most important for mastery. So, to review, in this lesson we described some of the benefits of having clear and explicit learning targets. We then discussed how to write various kinds of learning targets. We reviewed 5 different learning targets according to Stiggins, Arter, Chapois, and Chapois. And lastly, we looked at several practical ways we can integrate learning targets in your lessons to help students take ownership of their learning. Thank you for listening to Episode 5, Maximizing the Effectiveness of Your Learning Targets. My name is Aaron Marvel, and I will see you next time.